All right, good afternoon, evening, morning, whatever it might be for you. Hello, everyone. Mathew Hagam here, and I am joined by the one and only Ingrid Edstrom.
Hey,
Ingrid,
everybody.
how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you, Matthew?
I am fabulous. Thank you. Thank you. And we are here today to talk to you a little bit about the culture that we're aiming to create in the Accounting Alchemy Network. Ingrid and I, as you may know at this point, have been working tirelessly behind the scenes, trying to figure out really what is going to be needed in order for us to fulfill on the mission of the Accounting Alchemy Network, which is really, again, to create an opportunity for accountants to be agents for social change, to be the ones to have a positive impact on the world and to really do great things through our own work personally, and then of course through the work that we do with our clients and our community at large. And so because of that, we've also therefore worked tirelessly on a communications framework that we believe is sort of the cornerstone to this community that will allow for all of us to effectively communicate in a way that's constructive and regenerative. Check out the last video on that one, and really understand what we could do in our language, for example, to create an environment that's going to support one another's learning and growth over time. So Ingrid, I know you have a lot of thoughts and inspiration for the communications framework that we created together. I'm curious if you want to say a few words or just kind of get us acclimated to what this communications framework is about, and more specifically, perhaps what some of these cultural guidelines are that we've put inside of this framework.
Yeah, so I guess the first thing is many of you have maybe looked at the communications framework or not. We've posted it a few different times in different posts to try to draw people's attention over to it so that we can set what the expectations are for the culture. And many of you, being busy accountants, probably looked at it and said, it's a 3-page document. I'll look at it later, and then didn't. So we wanted to give you kind of a super brief idea of what's going on here so that you have enough to at least get started and you don't have to be intimidated by 3 pages wall of text. So I guess to start off with, what we're working to create here is meant to be powerful, not perfect. We are all learning and growing together, and we want to create an environment where people feel comfortable stepping forward and also stepping back to allow new voices to step forward, new ideas. So really allowing for fallibility and personal growth and change in all of these conversations. What we're trying to do here is kind of radical and not how business is usually done. And it gets kind of vulnerable and personal, and the kind of change we're asking for is not going to happen overnight. So being patient with each other, recognizing that this is an experiment, we're going to make mistakes, and allow for growth, being patient with ourselves, with others, and with the mission as a whole, recognizing that we are throwing spaghetti at the wall here, and sometimes we don't even notice what's sticking and what's not.
Exactly. And I love that we are creating a space for people to be vulnerable and to share what they need to share in order to move the conversation forward. But that being said, it could get a little messy, right? I mean, sometimes we say things that in hindsight we're like, oh, wow, I can't believe I said that, or maybe I should have really paused before I spoke up, right? Or maybe you were missing information that would have otherwise informed your response. And so that being said, because we are moving into a space where where people can say things that might trigger some of our reaction, one of the requests that we have, and really this is a zero tolerance policy, is around negativity. No matter what, please keep your responses in the positive and really be open to hearing other people's ideas and thoughts and creating the space for them to share those thoughts so that we can hear what they have to say and get the community dialogue going. And I think that's really important. Now, this next one on the list, I really would love it if you, Ingrid, could explain. It's the positive sum game. You introduced me to that. Do you want to articulate what that means?
And actually, before we get into positive sum game, I want to reframe the negativity versus positivity just a little bit. there is such a thing as toxic positivity, and that is not what we are going for here. We're not saying that everyone has to agree. We're not saying that everyone has to agree with us. This is a space where we want people to bring in a diversity of ideas and be able to debate and even argue as a form of education. And there's a way to do that in a healthy, positive manner where you're not taking things personally or making things personal. And that is what we're going for. And like we said, it's powerful, not perfect. We're going to make mistakes. It's when somebody actually starts being a super, super negative troll that's hurting people's feelings and like putting others down that we say, mm-mm. So if we sense that some people are going that direction, we'll have a conversation with those people. It's, you know, unless it's really, really clear that someone is actively trying to tear the community down, there will be softer approaches. So when we say zero tolerance for negativity, if somebody's pushing your buttons, please bring it up to us. We want to make sure that this is a safe space for everybody, and that is also a safe space for learning, growing, and making mistakes. So with that, yes, we are working to create a positive sum game, which is not to do with negative and positive thinking so much as what kind of game are we playing? Many of you may have heard of the idea of a zero-sum game. A zero-sum game in game theory is a game where in order for someone to win, someone or something else has to lose. The winnings of one side is made up of the losses of another. And so in business, that often involves thinking that there's a limited amount of pie out there, a limited pot of money, and in order for us to have more, somebody else has to have less, or that in order to create more, we have to pull and extract more resources than our world can give in a sustainable and regenerative fashion. So we want to shift that and recognize that we can create positive sum games in this community, which is win-win scenarios. And the main thing about creating a win-win is that all sides have to be willing to try to create a win-win. And those win-win scenarios come out of actually one of the points that we make later, which consent conversations. We have to make sure that everyone's needs are considered and cared for, and respect each other's no's, recognizing that we can endeavor to create win-win positive solutions, or we don't have to play together, and that's okay. And not playing together, that doesn't mean that you go get to take resources from somebody else. We need to reevaluate what it means to share one planet together. We have one planet, that's all we get. So really thinking about positive sum game and how we can create win-win solutions in this community, and then apply those ideas to the world as a whole.
Beautiful. Well said, Ingrid. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And one last thing I'll mention, which I think you in our communications framework, Ingrid, you brought up this Viktor Frankl quote, which I'll say now, and I hope I say it correctly. So everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. That's a really powerful statement and a great quote, Ingrid. And I'd love for you to share with our listeners, our audience here, why you believe that's such a powerful quote for informing this communications framework.
Well, for anyone who hasn't read Viktor Frankl's beautiful book, Man's Search for Meaning, he wrote that book in large part going over his experience as a concentration camp survivor. And a lot of people, if they hear, oh, we can always choose our attitude, they would say, oh, easy for you to say, look at you and all your privilege. Except that Viktor Frankl literally lived through some of the worst that humans have ever had to experience. And so to recognize that we can always choose our attitude. We may not be able to choose our circumstances or even our emotions. Our emotions are largely chemical inside of our bodies. And while emotions follow our thoughts and we can choose our thinking, it takes time to shift and change a lot of those patterns. But we can always choose our attitude, whether we're going to have a positive attitude that furthers our goals or a negative attitude that works against us. And we want to work in this community toward choosing a positive attitude, which means responding constructively in any situation or circumstance. And also recognizing that if people could act well, they would, if they're not, something happened. So if someone else is triggered, maybe they're not able to choose their emotions in that circumstance, we can still choose our attitude around that person's behavior and maybe encourage them, show them, there's other paths here. Do we want to try to create a more positive interaction? Because I would like to invite you to have a positive interaction with me, and recognizing that even confrontation is a positive interaction with a momentary negative emotional response. And if we can get past that momentary negative emotional response, there is a lot of learning and growth that can happen there if we're simply willing to have a positive attitude around it.
Thank you, Ingrid. Now, before we wrap this video up, just a couple of comments. If you haven't had a chance to look at the communications framework, Ingrid and I all but covered the first page of what that is. So please check out that document. Please go through it. And if you only have a moment but to scan or skim, pay attention to the bolded text so that you can understand at least the key principles that are informing this communications framework. Now, Ingrid, earlier you had mentioned consent, and I wanted to go back to that for a moment before we close this video. Was there anything else that you wanted to share about consent, what that means, and how that's going to function inside of this community?
Sure. I guess the main thing is just recognizing the consent. People have been talking a lot about consent conversations, particularly since the Me Too movement came around, as it applies to our physical bodies. However, consent applies to a lot more than that. It applies to any interaction that we have, and recognizing that things like advice giving or even having a conversation at all requires consent. It may be that someone's not in the headspace or that they don't choose to engage in that fashion, and we need to respect people when they say no to us. So whether that means offering, receiving feedback or opinions, that all of our conversations are consent-based, that they are opt-in, and if somebody doesn't choose to engage in a particular conversation, don't assume what's going on for them in that moment. Just respect their no. And you can invite more conversation around it, but at the same time, they don't have to explain their no. So stepping back, letting it go, not taking it personally, and engaging where we're able to and within people's comfort levels, because we are going to be getting into some somewhat challenging topics for a lot of people, and we need to meet each participant where they are.
Perfect. All right. Thank you, Ingrid. That was super clear. So if you have any questions or suggestions or comments about the communications framework, we would be more than happy to receive those. Please put them in the comments below. If you want to direct those communications directly to either Ingrid or I, please feel free to do so. We do want this communications framework to really serve you and support you in helping to fulfill the mission of this community. So thank you again for listening, for paying attention, for being here. Ingrid, any other final comments before we close?
One more thing. Speaking of perfect, it's not perfect, it's powerful. That goes for the communications framework too. So if you have any feedback for us, Mathew and I came up with this kind of off the cuff, and this is not the final iteration. It's going to be growing and changing and evolving as we grow and change and evolve as a group, and a big part of that is your ideas and feedback. So please, we welcome your feedback. We are building this together.
Yay, awesome. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.